Tate McBroom, how you doing?
Fantastic. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing all right. Or James Tate McBroom. We always called you Tate.
It's funny, depending upon which part of my life you're talking about, it's either been James, Jim, Jimmy, or Tate. So I've changed it around quite a bit for a variety of reasons at different times in my life. I just got done managing a restaurant for almost 3.5 years in Clarkston, Michigan. And when I took the job, I went by James McBroom because for any reason, if it didn't work out, James is much easier to forget than Tate. So I got there, and the owner's name was James as well. So about a month into it, my general manager was just like, "I'm everybody's confused. You're just Jimmy." So I was Jimmy for the last 3.5 years. It's a true story. So yeah, variations on the same thing.
Well, Jimmy,
Nah, you know me as a Tate, man.
So, okay, I got to jump right in because I remember. So the last time I was up in Michigan, and we did a few gigs at Baker's Keyboard Lounge.
Yes.
And for I don't know, over 3 or 4 months or something, I was up there like once or twice or something, or did a weekend or something, and that was all orchestrated by you, which I'm not surprised by that because that's been something that's been a pretty common aspect of our interaction. You've been a hustle machine, and you know how to talk the language of the club owner, but you're also a musician, and you identify with musicians, and so that I think puts you in a unique sort of position to be able to make a lot of these kinds of things happen. When I think about, for instance, our initial interactions way back at Western Michigan University, and I think about the scene around in Kalamazoo. I know now, and I had an idea about this then, but I know now that you were a high percentage of why much of that stuff happened. And I think a lot of folks are indebted to you for those opportunities to play, for a lot of the things that you facilitated. So I wanted to start out by saying that, and we've known each other for a long time, and you've always been, honest and straightforward and generous, and you're a good dude, and happy to know you. Now, okay, now that I said all that stuff, now let me grill you some.
Go ahead.
So one thing that's interesting is, so the last time I was up there, I know you and your wife, you were trying to have a kid, and we had some conversations about that, and I kept thinking to myself, man, this is going to happen like any day. And maybe it took a little bit longer to happen, but then it happened, and man, I was so excited and so happy for you because even when I was staying with you, this last gig, the series, man, what was that? 2 years ago, 3? I don't know how long ago it was now.
It was that well, to backtrack, it's the really funny part is, for those who don't know, we go back 20 years, you and I. And all the way back to the origins you're talking about, not to date us, but too late. And we hadn't spoken in a long, long time for sure. I think I came to pick up my snare drum that I had left with you like eons ago down in Columbus, and we caught up and had a bite to eat, maybe 11, 12 years ago, but we hadn't really spoken much. And I go to see the Don Cheadle, Miles Davis movie, Miles Ahead, with a good friend of mine. And I'm watching the studio scene, and there you are playing Cannonball Adderley. And I literally, in the middle of the movie, just text you. I was like, did I just see you in this Miles Ahead movie? And then you just sent me back a single text and just, yep. And that's what kind of restarted the dialogue. And that was 2016, I want to say. So a lot of how we got back to having these conversations and re-involving working together really goes back to the familiarity of all the stuff we did so long ago in Kalamazoo. But as far as me becoming a father, I kind of feel like we've had a lot of conversations about that in the past. And the key that I've learned inherently in the last year and a half, we found out we were going to be parents in the quarantine in April of last year. You know, there is absolutely no plan of your own design. It does happen when it's supposed to happen, and when it does happen, you're privy to one of the greatest miracles and blessings that you could ever experience in life. And everybody keeps telling me, and I'm sure it'll start happening at some point, that it goes by so quick. You know, 1 minute you're feeding your son or daughter with a bottle, and then the next minute they're graduating high school. I get all that. A strange phenomenon for me is that from the time we found out we were going to have Jackson, our son, time slowed all the way down. I'm telling you, my hand to God, that the last 13, 14 months have felt like 4.5 years. And I don't know why that is. Maybe I think, of course, the quarantine and COVID and everything has slowed things down to a certain degree, but I'm grateful for it, and I know it won't last forever, but it's really a strange thing, because I look at the last 20 years and they just flew.
Yeah.
Especially looking at all the articles and everything and all the keepsakes that I was telling you about in my basement in Kalamazoo all that time. But I've really been fortunate that for whatever reason, in the passage of time and the perspective, it's really slowed down enough for me to take stock and appreciate it. And to that end, I can say that creating another life is one of the most amazing, spiritual, rewarding, fulfilling, whatever words I can't put into it right now, but you get what I'm trying to say. That any two people that truly deeply committed love for each other can do. With that said, it's also something I don't recommend for anybody if that's not your situation with your partner, because good Lord, this is...
Yeah, it takes every ounce. It takes every ounce. You know,
I mean, and you have to not only manage time, you have to become a monk in terms of your patience and your ability to withhold motion, feeling, and hair trigger reactions, and all these things. And again, I'm grateful for it, because, you know, these are things that anybody could always use more practice with. But I'm learning a lot more about what I put my parents through and what most parents have to go through. And I think it's fair to say I'm getting my comeuppance. That's why we named our son after both of our fathers. So yeah,
you know, it's one thing that's interesting about this is in our conversations, I just remember, you know, because both of us have really great dads.
We did.
You know,
and you said this to me 20 years ago. I'll never forget it. You said, you know, I think you're going to be a great father. There was no, if you choose, you'll be a great father. There was, you kind of put some pixie dust on it a little bit. It was, you're going to be a great father because you had a great father. That's the same reason I knew I was going to be, because we both had great fathers.
Yeah, that's how, you know, there's no, you know, there's no mystery. There's no like secret formula. It's,
nope.
You know, it's just about where you come from. And we tend to,
Thank you so much for watching my video so far. If you'd like to support, there are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video.
We tend to repeat what we see. That whole thing about becoming your parent, that whole thing.
Yeah.
And especially if you had a good one, it becomes harder and harder to resist because all of because when you start to get of age, you start to realize the profundity of many of the things that your parent was trying to tell you, and it's like, oh, and so then it's like, you know what, what's the use in fighting that? That was really great advice. And of course, nobody's perfect. Parents make mistakes. Our dads have made mistakes. And we can learn from that too. But, generally speaking, I mean, it seems like they did a pretty good job. I mean, we're good dads, so they must have did something.
Oh, absolutely.
Something right.
I'll never forget all through my adolescence and even early college years. Every time I'd leave the house, my dad would do this thing where he just looked at me with that intensity of his stare, and he wouldn't say anything. He'd just look at me and do this. And it was the same thing. Use your head. Don't put yourself in a situation that neither you or I can get you out of, ever.
Yeah.
And don't compromise your own safety or the safety of others with you. And I can't tell you, Sean, how many times definitely in the last 15 years, that I have been face to face with walking into a room I probably couldn't have walked out of, or so many other variances of situations that, the wrong place, wrong time, whatever. And just it just echoed in my brain. I was like, yeah, I got to go. And that has kept me safe in my life. And it's something that started in the early 90s and it carries through for the last 3+ decades. So I'm eternally grateful to my father for that. Somebody who, of course, very well. So,
yes.
I think it's no accident that we become not replicas, but we become extensions of our parents, good, bad, and indifferent.
What do they say? The apple doesn't fall very far from the tree.
Nope, it does not. Much as we may try.
Yeah, that's right. You can try, but
the templates you got are the templates you got. They are not changing. Good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah. So. One thing I tell my students and, anyone that wants to hear, and it's kind of it's a joke, but it also is to sort of communicate the level of commitment that you must have if you want to be a good parent, especially in the early days of being a parent. And that is, before my son Moses, who, by the way, is 7 now and is about to be 8.
That's where it starts going by really quick.
Man, I swear, like yesterday he was,
Sean, he was 3 or 4 the last time you were up here. That was not that long ago, but it was clear.
But what I say is, before my son, I used to think I needed 7.5, 8 hours of sleep. Now I know I only need 3.
Power naps.
That's right. All you really need is 3. If you could get 3, I can function on 3. That's too bad. So, all right. So let's talk about a young Tate. So growing up and some of the things, obviously we talked a little bit about your dad, but why don't you kind of take a stroll down memory lane and talk about how you came up, um, and then different aspects of who you are as a person. Maybe when music started to become a bigger deal, and some of the sort of different sort of pathways that you've sort of forged for yourself in that.
Okay. Well, music has been part of my family for a very, very, very long time. The grand majority of my father's side of the family, uncles and cousins, are all musicians or singers of one form or another, going all the way back about 4, maybe even 5 generations at this point. Late 1800s, early 1900s, we had a great, great, great grandmother by the name of Emma Tate, that Tate was her last name. That's how it got into my line of men directly, which goes back 4 generations. My father's middle name is Tate. His father's middle name is Tate. His father's middle name is Tate. And it all came from that woman. And she was a concert Carnegie Hall level pianist and an exceptional talent. And the little pieces and archives that we have on it that we know. And so it was always, music was always very innate with me. I started playing piano at the age of 6. I took lessons from a guy who actually played professionally in New York City in the 80s. I moved around quite a bit when I was a child. I was born in Portland, Maine, lived in Lancaster, Ohio, Berkeley Heights, New Jersey, and then moved to the Detroit area when I was 11 in 1987. But, we did a lot of car trips back then. My father was the mixtape master. He had a great vinyl collection and would take the time and had bought like the best possible component gear you could get, Macintosh speakers, preamps, like, you're talking studio grade cassette recorders. So we'd always have CD level quality mixtapes in the cars on all these long trips. So from that introduction, I got introduced to soul music at a very, very, very early age. Curtis Mayfield, The Impressions, Aretha Franklin, a lot of Motown and a lot of 60s rock, 70s rock, and random forms of country and just different classical music and everything across the whole spectrum. Mainly on those car trips, and that's what kind of seeded it for me. And then my Uncle John got married when he was 21 years old back in the mid 80s, and my father woke me up in Roanoke, Virginia at like 1 o'clock in the morning when I was 10. He said, come with me, we're going to go to your uncle's bachelor party. And it was not some sort of, what you would traditionally think of. It was just all his high school buddies jamming out in the basement of my grandmother's house. And, it was whiskey and cigarette smoke and everything that doesn't exist these days. You wouldn't subject a 10-year-old kid to, but I was a little fly on the wall watching what they were doing. And I watched the pure enjoyment and the reward of playing music being its own reward with these guys at the age of 10. And, the drummer just caught my attention and I didn't want to play piano anymore. I went home and got some wooden spoons and couch pillows and went to town on the couch, little yellow Sony Walkman, listening to all my favorite records. And about a year later, I didn't ask for a drum kit or anything. It's just that it came downstairs right when we first moved to Michigan for Christmas, and there was a drum kit, which I think was my mother's attempt to stop, tearing up her couches with wooden spoons. At least that was probably the initial idea. And then honestly, from that moment in time, all my associations, all of my paths in life, good, bad, or indifferent, all my ups, my downs, my victories, my losses, have all been defined by either playing drums, playing music with other people, meeting people through that trade, And then eventually becoming the person who was the go-between for a lot of things. So, in terms of the music business end, which is where we ended up working. I think really what formed my desire to be so heavily involved is my first couple of bands I played in, I was just the drummer and everybody else was handling the business. And I actually got kicked out of my high school band that kind of led into the first year of college over a dispute of my lack of a meter at that time, because, I'd start playing ear, and by the end of the song, I was already about another 12, 14 beats per minute faster. I was very raw and very undisciplined, but, they let me go and fired me from a band that had my name in it. And they kept, the name of the band was Tate's Basement, and they kept using it after they kicked me out. So suffice to say, I was determined. I was like, okay, if I ever do this again and have the the drive to actually make something of it, however you define that, I'm going to be the one calling the shots and in charge. And not from, some sort of ego-driven standpoint, just like, I don't want to invest a bunch of my time into.
You got to control your own destiny.
Period. And I was not going to get the short end of the stick of something I had helped build ever again. And when a band doesn't work or doesn't or ends up, it's because, I'm in agreement that it's just time to move on. And there's been plenty of that, as there is for everybody who plays in bands and plays music. But so that brings us to Kalamazoo, which I came to when I was 21 years old in fall of '97. And, again, just my knowledge of music and having worked at other college radio stations, I got a job at WIDR, which is, one of the best college radio stations in the country. It's where Tim Allen actually, Tool Time Tim, got his start. And he actually grew up right across the street in Beverly Hills, Michigan, from where I grew up, much before me, of course. But it was an incredible college radio station. Was well funded, well organized, and had a very, very legit broadcast of almost 15 miles in any direction, which is not standard for a lot of college radio stations. A lot of them will just be able to broadcast within 2 miles on campus, that kind of thing. But I met a lot of people through that job and became very involved with the special event. I became the special events coordinator for about a year there. And so I was tasked with putting together the lineup for Barking Tuna Festival, which was their yearly event in the fall, kind of a welcome back sort of thing. And right around the time I stopped working there, I got involved with a group of guys that eventually became a band called Ubiquitous, which is where you and I first worked together musically.
Yeah. And
I just found our CD release party edited video on VHS in this basement cleaning project. And I went and got it transferred just for fun. And, I was expecting the generational loss from VHS to transfer to be, I thought I was almost going to have to go sync the actual master MP3 files that I have on my studio computer. But it was much better than I thought it was. It's all there. And it was literally, I put a post on Facebook and everybody that was involved laughed because they're just like, wow, this happened 20 years ago on March 30th. And, my most proud moment of working in the Kalamazoo music scene is the fact that the Kalamazoo music scene in and of itself has a very long, storied, glorious history that goes back 40, 50 years at least. The Gibson Guitar Factory was there for many years. Now it's Heritage Guitars. And all the best players in the world used to have to come to Kalamazoo to get their guitars. Wes Montgomery, Grant Green, George Benson, Rolling Stones, all these people came to Kalamazoo to get their guitars. Narada Michael Walding, Grammy-winning producer, who we actually got a chance to back up on a couple of his family reunion gigs years ago in Kalamazoo. You know, he was the drummer for Weather Report and Mahavishnu Orchestra, and went on to produce Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey and everybody. You know, he's from Kalamazoo and was a world-class musician at the Western Michigan Music Program, and that's back in the 70s. So by the time we got involved in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was this revival that was going on. And a lot of it was fueled, I want to say specifically, by the fact that this like invisible wall that I felt at the time existed between local musicians and musicians at the Western Michigan School of Music program, specifically the School of Jazz, had existed for a long time. Now, I had been there for a good 2 years, and I just didn't see people between the two scenes really intermingling or playing with each other much, or being in each other's bands, or even doing guest appearances. And it started over at Cafe Gulistan before it even went to District 211, which is where you and I really started working pretty heavy. And by the way, I got the District 211 East End Jazz Summit proudly sitting in my office right over here. Yep. That's still one of my favorite times from working in Kalamazoo. But, you know, it started with a little Middle Eastern restaurant bar called Cafe Gulistan, and that's where the wall started falling. And, you know, I put the program that you were part of, because I did not go to Western for music. I went, you know, standard communication degree. But I put the School of Music program at that time up against any other School of Music, definitely School of Jazz program anywhere in the country. I mean, I could sit here probably for a good 10 minutes with you and go down every world-class player that was there all at the same time. And you've interviewed a lot of them on this podcast. You know, I saw that you had Joe Ayub and Bartos and all these guys, and Doug Pierce and Mark Landis and Raphael Crawford, Brett Farkas and Javin Hunter, and I could just keep going.
Yep.
And that's when I was going in my basement and I found the Kalamazoo Jazz, the Kalamazoo Express magazine that they used to have back in the day that got discontinued a long time ago, had Roger Shrew, rest in peace, on the cover.
Yeah.
And it just took me back. And I've actually got a package downstairs that I'm going to send to you in the next couple of days with all this stuff and all the things that we did. But it started at Gulistan and then it worked its way over to District 211. And I'll tell you, it took me kind of realizing by the time I left what an impact that all the work that people like you and I did at District 211 did. It created a demand for live jazz all over Kalamazoo.
Yeah. They
even had a restaurant called the Union.
That's right.
That was Epic Bistro, whatever, Millennium Restaurant Group. Yeah. They had the Epic Bistro on the mall, and they had Union, and then they had a bunch of different restaurants in St. Joe and South Haven and everything. But they created a restaurant, a beautiful restaurant called the Union, that was meant to be like the student union. And they built a world-class stage and sound system for all the School of Music, Western Michigan players to come down and play at. And when I saw that, somebody actually mentioned to me when I was working at 211, they asked me if that pissed me off or if I, felt like they were just ripping off our idea. And I said, no, not at all. So that was the goal. The goal was to create as many places as possible to showcase live music. And at that era in Kalamazoo, whether you were a jazz band or a hippie jam band or a live hip hop group or whatever, you had multiple venues that you could take what you were doing and you could showcase it. And I think seeing an entire restaurant, you know, multi-million dollar investment made in that. That was a pretty awesome feeling. And I think it all culminated with that East End Jazz Summit that we did. And we had 3 days in a parking lot. We're at the exact same time as the Blues Festival across the street. Everybody thought I was crazy for wanting to do that. I said, why wouldn't you do that? You have the ability to draw from an additional 7,000, 8,000 people that are going to be walking the block. And that's exactly what we did. We stole hundreds of people from their festival every day to come to ours. But Kalamazoo was, the more I think about it, it really was an anomaly for that era. You had some of the best musicians I've ever known in my life, either in the scene at that time in any different type of genre of music, or just popping their head in. Perfect example would be Dorico Watson. You know,
Yep.
Pound for pound, one of the best drummers on planet Earth alive. I put him up against anybody in any field
Ever.
ever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
this guy would be playing one of our little Club Soda gigs that we would put together. My former Usual Productions business partner, Jeremy Howard, who also booked Maceo at Bell's, was one of the best. That was one of the best live outside booking jobs done by anybody from that era. You know, we had 1,000, 1,200 people for the Bell's Beer Garden closing party. You remember you played it. It was just amazing.
Yeah.
But, you know, he would book Dorico at Club Soda, and there'd be 150 people there. And Dorico would have, you know, Darius Pimpleton, Brett Farkas, and Joe Ayub as his backing band, and they would play like they were playing the Palace of Auburn Hills, and just blow your wig back, man. And you had all these people in one place and one space at one time, and it was truly magical. And I was very grateful to be a part of it, because it ended up informing how I approached music and business equally when I came back to Detroit after that. So I've been very fortunate to have had the experiences I had from Kalamazoo. It formed me in more ways than one. And I think I'm really glad that I kept every news article that was written between the Kalamazoo Express, the Weekend Scene, Kalamazoo Gazette, everything that was covered. I kept multiple copies of, like at least 8 to 15 of anything. And I know I kept those because there was going to come a time where I was going to put those together in packages and send them to the people that were involved. And the one that I'm going to send to you, the one thing I was really proud of is you and I helped curate an entire series of concerts in the month of February at District 211 in 2002 during Black History Month. Yeah. And we had 8 concerts where each one of the bands that were put together, that you and I, in some cases, chose musicians to play together to pay tribute to the Charlie Parkers, John Coltrane's, Grant Green's, Eddie Harris, Les McCann, all over the map. And it was a huge success. And they wrote about it. I've got these articles, and that's where a lot of other restaurants started taking notice, like they needed to book that kind of music as well. So,
and I remember, and there was a what was it, First Fridays or whatever?
Oh,
and,
man, those were huge. You had Rodney Whitaker, Dorico Watson, Nick Calandro, all those guys. From
Bill the Buddha Dickens came down for one.
Yes.
Vincent Chandler, Dwight Adams.
Yep.
Yeah, it was heavy.
The funny thing is, I've since played and shared the stage at Baker's with guys like Vincent Chandler and Dwight Adams through Alan Barnes, rest in peace, and Primetime, the band that I was a part of for the better part of 10 years. So learning from everybody that I learned from in Kalamazoo was to just listen.
Mm.
Don't talk, just listen sometimes. You'll learn a lot more. And I will say in retrospect to that era, I've also learned a lot about how not to be so abrasive or so intense. As many people that I'm close with that appreciated what I did back then, there's probably an equal amount that didn't get it or were turned off by it. And you know,
Yeah.
to,
Well,
to make
I'll tell you. Let me say something, man. I understood that. I got that. I'm an intense, pretty intense character myself,
yeah,
and so I could recognize what that was, where it was coming from, and wasn't sort of. I just see that as being potentially a tremendous asset because you can get stuff done.
yeah,
Being that way. But I've also noticed that some people don't get that. They don't understand that, and um, I know that certain people that were in my life that you know they couldn't handle that, and so they had to get away from me.
yeah.
You know, and that it's like this. It's a drawing force to the people that can really take that, and they're really serious and they're trying to go somewhere. But it's a repelling force for basically half steppers.
Oh yeah, and that literally is, it was the impetus for the breakup of my college band, Ubiquitous, the one that you and I played music together with first, and that was where Greg Sanders and I, G-Rock, who I'm still playing with 21 years later, to this day, we just decided to go another direction. We had other goals and other interests and other ambitions, and it happened the way it was supposed to happen. Majority of bands that you play in are meant to serve a purpose for growth at one time or another, and then they go away. I think the one thing that I've really focused on in my own playing in the last decade plus is there's certain nights that you're on stage because you can do things in the woodshed and work on your skill set, work on your ability, work on your dexterity, so on and so forth. But until you get on stage, you can't move from one level to another. You got that thing I saw about leveling up, and personally, professionally, and with discipline and things of that nature. And it takes all that for sure. But musically, as a musician, I've found, and this is just my own experience, that you can't level up as a player until the other players around you are pushing you. And I was blessed because I've had people like G-Rock, Greg Sanders, who's been pushing me for 20 years. It's a trip when, I used to spin Blackbird's records at WIDR in Kalamazoo. And then fast forward 15 years later, Alan Barnes is standing up in my wedding for me and playing my wife down the aisle. That was a trip. Alan, of course, played with Donald Byrd, Gil Scott-Heron, Fred Wesley, Prince, so many people. And he pushed me. I first got my gig at Baker's, and he said, hey, why don't you come down and play with us at Baker's on Saturday? I said, cool. When's the rehearsal? There's no rehearsal. Okay, what's the set list? Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. It was the equivalent of pushing a newborn into the deep end of the pool. And he was right. It was sink or swim. You figure it out. Just get really big ears and listen. And then, I've had various piano players primarily that I've gotten a chance to know and play with in the last 10, 15 years since I've been back in Detroit. All over the map, all kinds of great piano players, because it's a percussion instrument who, by the virtue of playing and sharing a stage like Baker's, they get a chance to just stretch. And when they stretch rhythmically, that's going to stretch you. And it's made me more elastic. It's made me more reactive and my ability to anticipate is gone, increased tenfold.
Yeah, speaking of keyboard players, I'm gonna be interviewing Zoe.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Good.
in a couple weeks. Haven't talked to him.
Lorenzo Ferguson, a really good friend and original Gorilla Funk Mob keyboard player from when we first moved back here. He's done all kinds of great work with all kinds of people. Foreign Exchange, Fonte from Little Brother. I mean, hell, his resume I could just go all the way down on, but great player and somebody we worked with for many years, especially when we were establishing ourselves back in the Kalamazoo scene. But I'm glad you're going to be interviewing him. He'll be a great interview.
Yeah, it's been a long time. We one thing that the pandemic has done, it's given me an opportunity to, you earlier you were talking about how it seems like things slowed down after your son was born. I've had a similar experience with this pandemic, and things just kind of slowing down, and just a lot of things that were kind of by the wayside, or I didn't really know how they were ever going to sort of manifest. It's given me time to do that and reconnect with folks, like yourself, like Renzo. I mean, like, dozens of folks, that I've interviewed thus far. It's been really kind of rejuvenating, and it's been it's kept me engaged, kept me from going totally crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, that the Kalamazoo history that you were recalling, I get so I'm filled with nostalgia, whenever I think about it. I can almost taste the air or something, from the period that I'm imagining. And all of those gigs at District 211 in particular with the East End Orchestra, that was a gig that was all you. And
I technically came up with the name for that band too.
That's right, you did. You named the band, and we were there for a year and a half. It was a Thursday night gig, and we had the food there was excellent, and we got to eat. I think until the very end, where I think the budget was starting to get stressed a little bit, so then we weren't eating anymore. But for most of the time, we were eating, and that was one of my favorite gigs. And that band had, it was an all-star cast. Joey Ayub was playing bass in that band. Who else played bass in that band?
Roger played. Lyman sat in a couple times.
That's right, Roger and Lyman. And I just interviewed Lyman, and we talked quite a bit about Roger.
Yeah.
And he's kind of taken the position at the school he teaches at, where Jamie Shue teaches. He's sort of taken over Roger's place there. And of course, Lyman and Roger were good friends when they were at Western. They were a year apart in their programs. But and Jevin Hunter and John Wirt. Let's see.
Dan Kramlich.
Dan Kramlich, that's right.
Chris Sargent on piano as well. You kind of had 2 or 3 piano players, 2 or 3 drummers, and 2 or 3. Well, it was really Jevin Hunter and one other guy. Yeah, but John Wirt, and it was Lyman, Roger, or
Joey Ayub.
But the horn section was always pretty much the same, and that was you, Raphael, and Mark Landis.
Except for at the end where it was Doug Pierce.
Doug was in there.
Took over from Landis, because Landis
moved to Chicago.
Finished his master's. No, not to Chicago. First he went to Miami.
Oh,
okay. So he left and went down to Miami. And I remember he came back he was back in Kalamazoo, like just visiting or something. I remember him poking his head around the
Mm-hmm.
corner and seeing us in there playing. Um, but yeah, it was a terrific group, and I still have those books, the East End Orchestra books,
Mm-hmm.
these huge binders, the plastic sheets covering the pages, and yeah, it was just it was just really a transformative moment in time. And then my quartet played there on Fridays, and
Yeah.
I think the quartet played there for a couple years.
Yeah.
Um,
It
and then
really,
of course we had the first Fridays thing, which was really killing because again we had a bigger budget and it was a long the day was longer. So like I was booking a keyboard player to play earlier in the day, and then there was a bigger budget in the evening where I
mm-hmm.
could bring in a guest artist and was doing like themed concerts and yeah, man, that was just a really great.
I mean,
Yeah.
the crazy thing about it is, can you imagine, for people who aren't familiar, 20 years ago, a restaurant giving $125,000 a year to book live jazz? That's not Baker's Keyboard Lounge or not the Village Vanguard or not. Well, of course, those places have much bigger budgets, but you get my point. And I think, having just come from a restaurant, I managed a restaurant, as I mentioned earlier, called the Fed Community up in Clarkston, Michigan. It's a drop dead gorgeous venue. It's a 110-year-old bank building from the early 20th century. And they converted it into a restaurant and a bar, but they kept the vaults and they turned them into private dining rooms and they did all this other stuff. That whole reconstituting, repurposing an older building from the late 19th century, early 20th century into something new and fresh and original with maintaining some of the character of the original building. That whole movement, at least in Michigan and the Midwest that I know of, started in Kalamazoo and Grand Rapids 20 plus years ago. And you see it everywhere in Detroit now and see it all over the state. But that really started in buildings like that. And, their commitment was rock solid for the first 2 years. It ended up being a change of management from our biggest supporter, a guy by the name of Jerry Westcott, who I learned a lot from. Fantastic restaurant general manager and just business mind, period. He's the one who rolled the dice on East End Jazz Summit. He's the one who had approved, a large 5-figure budget to pull it off for 3 days. He's also the one that agreed to have live jazz 4 nights a week, Wednesday through Saturday, which nobody was doing at that time.
Yep.
And it was really one of the best compliments I ever got was from a guy named Don Neal, who had been a club owner, had been a very successful entrepreneur, and the kind of guy who owns like 5 or 6 different liquor licenses and will just lease it to somebody and you pay me 20% off the top kind of every year and just sits back and makes money. Just smart businessman. He had a place called Don Neal's in the 60s and 70s that did live jazz in Kalamazoo. And he actually booked Duke Ellington for what was going to be one of his last gigs. And Duke passed away before he got a chance to do the gig. And this is in 1974. And Duke's son showed up and the orchestra did the gig and then they went to the funeral. But he used to come through quite often, specifically on Thursday nights to hear the East End Jazz Orchestra. And he would say that, to be able to hear a Art Blakey Jazz Messenger type horn section of that quality randomly on a Thursday in this town, it speaks to my soul. And he says, you're doing great work here. Keep it up because, this town hasn't had this in many, 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 many years. And, that felt really good to hear that, especially from a guy who had been around for so long and had been one of the people 30, 40 years before us making Kalamazoo live music what it is. And, the District 211 experiment is one I'll never forget. And the place I just worked, we put a live music program together the same way, much of the same extension from the ground up, built it from the ground up. It was mostly just blues bands and solo acoustic singer-songwriters, but, our sales went up 35% the first month. It's not rocket science. People want to hear live music, no matter what part of the world it's in. The type of music might be different, the style, the players might come from different eras, different generations, but people want to connect to musicians and musicianship anywhere in the world. And that has not changed. Not now, not ever. So that's and really, if you think about the impetus for this conversation, I needed a sax player for our CD release party, and Eric Kappa, who we worked with for many years, in that band, was not able to keep coming back from Chicago, and he was like, I can't do it. I said, well, who should we get? He's like, there's only one person you should get, and that's Sean Wallace. He says, I don't know if he'll do it, but you should ask him. And I'm going to send you this footage from that show, man. We did, the first song we did off the bat was the cover of Sham Time by Eddie Harris. And you and Aaron McLaren, trumpeter at that time, who was going to Kalamazoo College, you guys, you blew it out the box, man. You had 400 people in that audience and just absolutely blew the roof off that night at Club Soda. So
I remember that. I remember that. I remember that very well.
Yeah.
As I remember, there was, let's see here, like I couldn't be there right at the beginning of the show or something, right. And I had to come in and just with the horn out already playing or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We were. It was a 2-hour concert. We definitely overstacked the. I think we played, the song list was like 17 or 18 songs that night. So It started at like midnight and it ended 20 minutes after they were supposed to kick everybody out of there. And you came in and Aaron had already been there for a sound check. He sound checked both mics, but yeah, it was pretty just get your axe out and get on stage and you know the songs. So that was pretty awesome. But you elevated your solo on Sham Time. I'm not joking, man. You'll see it when I send you the footage. You blew the roof off the building, man. And people, they weren't expecting that. We had various sax players before and a lot of good musicians, but you just came in there like Joe Henderson with a vengeance. It just blew the roof off. It was amazing. I'm so glad that the footage has been preserved.
Yeah, me too, man. I'm looking forward to seeing that. Yeah, but, so let's talk about the okay, so we had so this pandemic has been pretty destructive.
Yes.
Okay, it's to the music industry. And it's been a few things sort of stacked together, We've had this racial strife, the stuff with George Floyd, we had an election in the middle of that, obviously the coronavirus, and now we've had a couple different political parties occupying the White House with completely different sort of philosophies on how they want to do things. And meanwhile, as far as they're some are calling this a she session because disproportionately women have been losing their jobs, and it's created some in particular in the Black community, it's created, I think, a lot of opportunities for conversations that were not
Yeah.
taking place prior. I've seen an explosion of content on YouTube that is specifically focused on relationships, you know, between men and women, just the anywhere from kind of fundamental stuff to sort of trying to sort out issues that we have, and in trying to find ways that we can um, that we can coexist honestly. There's some different forces that are at play. It seems like the political parties sort of play against some of those when they're you have these campaigns, and they're sort of, you know, I know if I say these kind of things, and this group over here, you know, maybe a lot of them, that group is women, they're going to be a tendency for them to really like this, and there's this other group over here, maybe mostly men, and they might not like it, but the women will like it, and then vice versa. Another party saying, well, if I do these things here, well, you know, the guys will like this more. Women probably won't like it very much, but it's okay because, you know, we did our research, and we know
Right.
that all we need is 20% of this group, and we're going to win, and all of this kind of stuff. You know, this is very oversimplified, but there's been a lot of interesting developments over this time, as far as like interpersonal kinds of stuff. But as far as the sort of devastation, I think, to the music industry, what is your viewpoint on that?
Well, I think there's a couple things that are at play. The critique before the pandemic hit is music has never been so bad, or had gotten so bad on a macro level as it's gotten in the last decade. Blah, blah, blah. You know, people want to say that all the time. Or music's just not the same as it used to be. No, nothing is ever supposed to be the same as it was. It's supposed to evolve, first and foremost. But the only thing I will say is that there was a difference in the 60s and 70s and even the early 80s of somebody wanting to get an edit of a song in a recording studio, having to take a razor blade, going in, cut the tape, pull the tape back, put it together, and then run it back to get that one edit that they wanted.
That's right.
That, to me, was a barrier to entry of the commitment you needed to be in the music industry as a musician, as an engineer, as any position, because things were literally that much more labor intensive. They were that much more, you know, there's no margin for error. And I've been blessed in my time since I came back almost 20 years ago to the Detroit area. I've been blessed to meet and work with the McKinley Jacksons, who was Marvin Gaye's arranger for Motown for many years, and, you know, used to write, arrange, and conduct big symphony orchestras for all the string parts at United Sound and Motown. People like Bob Dennis, who was the mastering engineer on most of your Motown records, and guys like Ed Wolfram. And they all laughed at us because they say, you guys are just knob jockeys, you know, the engineers of today. If we wanted a reverb plate back in the day, we had to go buy a television, tear it apart, and build what we needed. You know, get the tubes out of it and get a soldering iron and create something. There was no going to a Guitar Center. So I think in a lot of ways, music that became so easy and so accessible to everybody, and studios are going out of business everywhere because you don't need a studio anymore, because all you need is an inbox and a Pro Tools and a microphone.
Right.
The pandemic in some ways is going to end up being, and this is just my opinion, it's going to end up being a great equalizer. Because if you don't already have your career, if you're trying to build one, you got to work harder than you've ever had before in your life. And you've got to learn how to do so many more things than you're accustomed to on not only the organizational side, the business side, the management side, the promotional, marketing, everything. And I am aware that something very specific has happened. You notice that, they stopped putting CD players in cars about 4 or 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Not by accident. Everything is going back to vinyl. Why? The major labels can control vinyl, and you're not just going to have a vinyl pressing plant in your college bedroom. You're not going to take this record you heard and just be able to start making more vinyl of that. And everybody who knew and understood the art of lathe cutting is at this point in their late 70s at the youngest, and in some cases 80s and 90s, or in most cases dead. And anybody who's still alive, they scooped up all those people and made sure that they set up these plants the right way and got all that working, because it's a return to vinyl as a return to the ownership of an actual physical product that can be quantified. And I think a lot of people, because of the pandemic, because of the devastation, because of the loss of revenue, definitely touring and merchandising, which, as you know, had become 50 to 60% of the money-making equation in the last 20 years for almost any artist. If you can't tour, if you can't sell your own merch, then that's the majority of your income right there. Because nobody was making any money off record sales, and unless you had an absolutely fantastic music supervisor working for you, you weren't going to get a ton of licenses either.
Right.
But now it's survival of the fittest, and it's adapt or die kind of thing. And I've noticed something that has happened recently, and one group in particular blew me away when I heard this news the other day, but it started, as you remember, probably about 3 or 4 months ago. You remember when they announced that Bob Dylan had sold off his catalog?
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
$300 million. To be clear, this is not a licensing of a catalog for 30 or 40 years. James Brown licensed his whole catalog for, I think, 50 or 60 years, 3 or 4 years before his death, and had trustees and administrators and all that to handle the money. But at some point, it actually, I believe, does go back to his family. So he didn't sell his off. But Bob Dylan, so he doesn't, like, there's your check. The government's going to take 39.6%, and then the rest is yours after your agent and everybody else. But, like, you get my point. He's cashing out. He's done. And then several other artists have followed suit since then. And it's only been about 4 or 5 months. But Sean, I heard that the Red Hot Chili Peppers, who are still active, sold their whole catalog the other day. And I said, what the hell is going on? But then I realized all the acts that came up 30, 40 years ago, if they're looking to make a move towards retirement, now is the time.
Yeah.
Because their number one source of revenue is never going to be the same, and that's touring. So you can have a great license to a movie. You can have this, you can have that. You can get your license in a commercial with multiple territories. You might get lucky and be like Sly Stone and have Toyota grab everyday people for a lifetime copyright and get $25 million. But the point is, those are few and far between. The industry is literally in a cash out position right now for a lot of people. So what does that mean? I think because so many forms of revenue have been either destroyed or mitigated at an extreme level, I think that it's honestly, it's about to be a new period of innovation and of new ideas and new constructs to reach your audience. I believe you're going to be seeing a lot of live stream concerts. I believe you're going to be seeing different, the whole evolution of the NFT. You know, people want memories. People now can quantify, qualify, and pay for a memory, and it can be exclusive to them. That's an unbelievable concept. You know, but again, what I was saying is I believe that it's going to be an equalizer in the sense of it's going to go back to what it was 40 years ago. If you're not willing to do the work to be successful on all levels, or if you can't afford to hire the people to do the work for the things that you fall short at as a professional or an artist or an entertainer, then you're going to have to make some hard decisions, because the infrastructures are gone. The major record labels are not giving out deals anymore. You know, the only deals that they're dealing with are people that can come with the product printed, the videos shot, edited, ready to go, and with half the money it takes to market up front. Those are the only people that are getting in the door at this point in time.
Yeah,
But again,
I've been saying I don't think that this is ever going to be like it was before.
No, the old ways of doing business are over. They're done. They're never coming back. So what does that mean? A lot of people who didn't have the dedication and maybe use technology to find a simple and an easy way in are not going to be able to sustain or to persevere. And all the old acts are cashing out. They're turning in the chips and going home. But I think it creates a lot of opportunities for someone to create the next great innovation in delivery systems of music, specifically live music and live entertainment. That's people's need and demand is not going to diminish. And I'll tell you this, the one thing I've noticed, you know how like the supply chains of everything, once things come back online, it's like, it's a bottleneck effect. You know, there's too much demand and there's not enough ability to push out that product fast enough. Mm-hmm. You've seen it in multiple ways in the last 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Live music's not going to be any different. Anybody who does have the ability to put festivals on and hire bands to return to that form and medium, you know, we grew up in an era of $20 got you a ticket to go see somebody at Pine Knob. Nowadays, that's like 90 to 120. Well, that price just went to $250 to $300 because there's no. I don't see. Maybe for another 4 or 5 years, I don't see the ability to put 15,000 people together anymore. I think you can space out 6,000 or 7,000. But those artists are not going to play for any less than they used to play for. So, you know, the cost is going to get passed on to the consumer. And after not being able to go to concerts for that long, they'll find those 6,000 or 7,000 people that want to pay $300 for nosebleed tickets. And if you want to be in the front row of something, that's $1,800 to $2,000 a ticket, and people are going to pay it. So it'll be interesting to see the innovation and the evolution of who comes up with the next great idea to offset the loss of the old way of doing things. It'll be fascinating. And there will be some great conceptual artists and inventors and business people who will find new constructs and new ways of creating new delivery systems for music and live music. And it'll be an exciting time, even though the devastation is incalculable. So many people have lost their livelihoods, and so many people have lost everything that they built and they spent an entire lifetime building, which is honestly, it's too much. It's too much to even like think about.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of folks that have just pivoted. They've like, hey, well, this music thing, this has sailed. I'm selling insurance now. You know, there's been a lot of folks that have done. I was playing a gig playing a gig for a graduation a ceremony at Ohio State um, for Fisher College of Business, and it was Dr. Thunder Quartet, which is my rebranded quartet. And this, it's four of us. We're eating. It's kind of a swanky gig. Like, we played, and then they fed us this, nice buffet style food. And we're talking, and we were just talking, about how things have changed, what's going to happen next, and each of us could think of somebody that was really talented, like somebody that had a lot of promise, and they're just not playing. And particularly, we were talking about a keyboard player that's selling used cars now. Kid that just finished school. He finished his performance degree. I mean, he had full of promise, everything, and you come out and this is what there is. It's like, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
And so I guess the kid he's playing at church, but that's pretty much his only outlet. So yeah, it's a mess, and I think it causes serious questions about academia and the sort of kinds of degree programs that academia is going to be able to justify. And
it's funny you say that. Yeah, it's funny you say that, because truthfully, I'm of the opinion that just the trends and everything that I've seen happen that were coming for a long time anyway, but the pandemic really only exacerbated them and accelerated what I saw being almost an extinction of 4-year liberal arts degrees and in some cases institutions. But now, I mean, Sean, I think in our lifetime, we're pretty close to age. In the next 25 to 30 years, I think we're going to see the closure and the end of, I can't really put a percentage on it, but at least 20% of the 4-year institutions in America are going to die. And it's because you can no longer justify the cost of the education against what's waiting for you when you're done. I think there's going to be an enormous rise in trade schools. Having worked in the construction field over the last 10, 15 years, just occasionally here and there, the majority of those guys are getting ready to retire, and there's nobody to replace them in mass. I'm talking about people that are between the ages of 50 and 63 years old. Can't get up on a roof like they used to.
Look, I've been saying this. This has been my song. This is the refrain. You're singing the chorus of the reoccurring. You just sang the theme, in a Hans Zimmer scored film.
Mm-hmm.
I am. I've been saying this since when I took the job, actually, at Ohio State in 2004. The curriculums need to be massively redesigned, and I think that there's like this age-old sort of discussion about the, scholarship versus sort of kind of a trade school sort of approach.
Absolutely.
And the thing is that universities are going to need to do more of the trade school thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the kinds of faculty members that they acquire are going to need to be much more multidisciplinary and
diversified.
Yeah, diversified, and having a better sort of understanding of what's actually happening in the real, in the real world. I mean, if you're talking about music, then folks that actually have their feet on the ground in the actual music industry, as opposed to, I think, a lot of the traditional kinds of faculty members where, because of, it's like the institutions is basically the only place where that sort of thing exists. I think
Right.
a lot of that is going to start to go by the wayside because it's hard to justify how much the stuff costs. If there's not actually a job in the real world when students finish, I mean, what are they going to do? Okay, I got this performance degree. Let me go sell insurance. At some point, it's like, I mean, music is a great pursuit. If you love music, if you have to have music, if you would die without music, if you would be miserable without music, then certainly, I think pursuing music as a degree in school, I think maybe that's a good idea. But if you have something else that you can do and you're conflicted about it, then my suggestion is probably to do that other thing. You can still have music as a heavy component of your life. You can still be
Right.
participating in the scene. You could still be taking lessons. You could still be taking courses at college, even. You could take lessons. You can play in ensembles. You can do all these things. But some of these degree programs, I'm very concerned that they don't have enough sort of modern information as to be directly applicable to what the student, what the young musician is going to face, when they get out in the real world. And that was, it was that way. Look, it was that way when I was a student. It was that way when I was a student. I felt exactly the same way when I was a student. And it's interesting. I finished my degree, and don't get me wrong, because a lot of stuff that you don't realize that you need, and you get frustrated with having to take this class and whatever it is, or counterpoint or whatever it is, kind of topic, or why am I studying music history? I don't care about Gregorian chant. You have this thought about it, but you're actually learning some other things that maybe later may actually become useful. But I remember when I finished my master's, and I just kept thinking to myself, all of the stuff that I have to learn now that I'm actually in the real music industry,
right,
that there was no discussion about when I was in school. And this is no fault to the great teaching and the great teachers at Western. It's just because the conservatory model is not really designed to accommodate a lot of these considerations. But we better get it happening now, because otherwise the end draweth nigh.
Let me give you the basis for what I learned from my parents before I got to college. My father worked for AT&T for 18 years. He saw a movie called Stand and Deliver about a James Edward Olmos, who teaches calculus and trigonometry to inner city students, inspired him to quit a very lucrative job at AT&T and become a high school math teacher, because he realized his passion was teaching young people the things that they would otherwise miss. And to this day, he still gets letters from kids. He taught at a private girls' school in Birmingham, Michigan called Marion. And he gets letters from young women who are now, mothers or successful businesswomen, who said, I couldn't stand you. Whoops. They said, I couldn't stand you when I had you as a teacher, but the fact that you were unrelenting and you tested us every day, and then you gave us practical applications of how this gets used in real life, I was able to apply it. And I was able to be much more ahead of the curve in my life and in business. And I think from that example, and then from my mother being a real estate agent and learning how she marketed herself to become very successful, there was a dogged determination they both had in the way that they approached those jobs. And those jobs only came about from the fact that we went from my father being the sole breadwinner to becoming a high school math teacher, which is not going to pay all the bills. And my mother had to go into business. And, after my sister and I were of a certain age. And I watched their example and I learned from it. And I learned the practicality of each one of their roles and how they approached it. I had to be willing to go do yard work on the house that my mother just listed that she couldn't afford to hire a crew for, to help her sell that house. My father had to show me when I was starting in the music business and starting that side of things. Well, have you considered, the idea of a net 30, a net 60, or a net 90? So what the hell is that? He said, there are plenty of businesses and plenty of contractors you're going to work with, but you don't see your money for 30 days or 60 days because that's their cycle. That's not yours. This is not, and not everything is cash and carry. And I started to learn how important understanding the practical application of knowledge through academia or through real life experience was. So honestly, for me being at Western, I was practicing what I was going to do when I left outside of the school. I was taking classes and learning how to become a better communicator and public speaking and all the things that that I know how to do. But I was practicing my real life stuff, my practicals, if you will, through all that scene building stuff. So I think
one thing that's interesting is I think for so one reason why I think what it was that you were doing was so important for the students at Western to get them some playing opportunities and the sort of opportunity while they were in school to actually interface with the actual music industry. I think that was important, but I also think that disproportionately jazz students, especially the more talented ones, are going to have more of those opportunities when they're in school than, say, for instance, many of the traditional students. I mean,
right.
Unless you're playing in like a, say, a community orchestra or something, or maybe you put together a string quartet, and there were some students that were doing those kind of things, not just at Western, but even at the school that I'm at now, at Ohio State. There are some particularly adventurous and industrious students that will do those kinds of things, some of the traditional students. But for the most part, the students that are doing those kinds of things, because of the prevalence of opportunities of sort of jazz and commercial music over sort of classical and chamber kind of venues and opportunities to play, I think that's an advantage that a student would have if they wanted to come and study jazz over a student that maybe wanted to study something traditionally.
Right.
And I think it's of utmost importance to, as soon as possible, to start using those skills and getting used to what the actual music industry is like as soon as possible.
I could not agree more. And to that end, I would say that any music school, academia accredited program, 4-year degree or otherwise, instead of instituting you have to minor in something. No, how about you have to have trade school experience? You're going to be a musician in the music industry. That's great. You either have to learn how to be a recording engineer, recording and sound engineer, or you have to learn how to do public relations, or you have to learn how to do accounting or artist management, or you have to know how to work in a vinyl record plant, pressing plant.
Yeah.
You have to do something that will give you a job and there are institutions like the Detroit Institute for Music Education in downtown Detroit, which is a multi-million-dollar, highly, very well-financed operation by a British couple that I believe either got the University of Colorado, and now it might be Michigan State University, to give not only their accreditation, but to work in conjunction with, so that they can also teach the basic practicals of general curriculum education. They are addressing all of those needs for all of their music performance students. You don't just get to play an instrument. You don't just get to learn how to sight read charts, and do all this other stuff. You have to have multiple other applications so that you can get a foothold in the industry in one of 3 or 4 different ways. And they cracked the code, man. They are accredited. Getting your degree from them is just like getting your 4-year college degree. It doesn't cost as much. And they have exceptional financial aid programs, and they're reaching out to all types of students in the city of Detroit, giving them a better option. But if 4-year institutions don't figure out a way to do that, then they're to equal that that type of construct, then they're going to go the way of the dodo. Period.
Yeah, and and let me say that, of course, I believe that higher education is important, and who am I to tell a student, if they should attend a school or not? I will say this: I think it's important to, wherever you go to school, that you're studying with someone that actually understands the real music industry and understands some of these issues, has wrestled with these issues a lot, and because of that wrestling, has developed a strategy to deal with a lot of these issues.
Yeah, I agree.
And that has to be that until the curriculum in a lot of these schools changes enough, that's really the only course of action that you have. If you're going to go to the school, you need to make sure that the instructor understands these ideas that we've been discussing. Yeah. Well, hey man, that's about our time, and that went by super super quickly. I'm definitely going to have you back.
It'll be my pleasure. And I would like to kind of end with this thought. I never failed to meet an opportunity that wasn't looking for me in the first place, but I had to be present, I had to be humble, and I had to be self-aware enough to recognize that the opportunity was right in front of my face. I think a lot of people with talent in both the fields of being musicianship or other ends they might want to pursue in the music industry, there's a certain amount of anxiety and timidness that's natural when you approach an industry that is as relenting and unrelenting and unforgiving as the music industry, which it's one of the, anybody you see in the music industry that's very successful is not a weak individual. They're exceptionally strong people, and they've got thick skin, and they were able to work their way through problems or situations that would have sunk them in any other opportunity. But I've never failed to meet an opportunity, been open to meet an opportunity. And it's changed my life invariably, and it's made the journey one that I wouldn't have I couldn't have imagined for myself as a child. So us talking now, 2 decades later, about these things is not by accident. And if you have an openness and you have a willingness to meet the opportunity halfway, then that's the start. But that's really where my life has, gone throughout the years, and there's always something new on the horizon. And I'll be there to meet that too.
Yeah, and I want to be there with you.
No, you will.
Yeah,
it doesn't go anywhere. Yeah, I still get people that come up to me and talk about that John Coltrane tribute that we did at Baker's, and we still have all the footage from that. Don't forget.
Yeah, and did you ever send me that footage?
I think I did, but even if I didn't, I have it on a hard drive. And the New York Times reached out to Jonathan because of that concert. Blue Note Records. There's a lot of different people who were there that night that we didn't even realize were in the audience that took note. And people left that concert talking about it clearly for weeks and months after. So that's how profound and powerful that was. And that was with you, Sean Dobbins, who was on bass and who was on piano. I can't remember.
Let's see here. Was it was the pianist
Guy with glasses, fantastic player.
Yeah. I'm sorry, man. I know I just can't think of his name right now.
You know who they were. And when we
I
look
do
back,
know who they were. Yeah. Yeah. And as soon as I see that, yeah.
That show, that concert, document your history. That's another thing I will say. Document your history. If you get a nice write-up in a paper, grab 15 copies of it, put them in a box, and you'll be glad you did 20 years later. And you'll be able to share them with people that you had those experiences with 20 years later, like I'm doing now. And it's actually allowing me to bring people back into my life I haven't seen in a very long time. It's common ground.
Well, stick around. Don't go anywhere just yet. But I'll see everybody later in the podcast here. God bless you.
Pleasure for having me.